When Captain Nielsen heard a family speaking Arabic in economy class, he decided they had to go. The disruptive father and his 3 children would be removed immediately. What he didn't know was that he was about to kick off Dr. Ahmed Hassan, chief of Pediatric Surgery at Amsterdam University Medical Center, and destroy his own career in the process. Sometimes the person you underestimate the most turns out to be the one person you should never have crossed. Purchased with money carefully saved over months of working double shifts at the hospital, what was meant to be a simple family trip to visit his late wife's sister would become a lesson in dignity, prejudice, and the power of standing up for what's right. The departure gate at Amsterdam's Schiphol Airport was crowded with the usual mix of budget travelers, families on vacation, and business passengers who had chosen the economical option for the short 2-hour flight to Barcelona. Ahmed sat quietly with his children, Amira, age 8, Omar, age 6, and little Yasmin, just 4 years old, watching as other passengers checked their phones and chatted about their travel plans. Ahmed Hassan looked tired, which was understandable given that he had worked a 16-hour shift at Amsterdam University Medical Center just 12 hours earlier. His clothes were clean, but wrinkled from being packed hastily in a small carry-on bag. His shoes, while polished, showed signs of extensive wear. To a casual observer, he appeared to be exactly what many people unfortunately expected: a struggling immigrant father trying to stretch every euro to provide for his children. The reality was far more complex. Dr. Ahmed Hassan was the chief of Pediatric Surgery at Amsterdam University Medical Center, one of Europe's most prestigious hospitals. He held medical degrees from both Cairo University and Harvard Medical School, and his research on minimally invasive surgical techniques had been published in journals worldwide. His annual salary exceeded 200,000 euros, and he owned a comfortable home in Amsterdam's exclusive Oudsee district. But today, none of that was visible. He was simply a widowed father taking his children to visit their aunt in Barcelona, carrying the weight of grief that still lingered 18 months after his wife Fatima's death from cancer. The children, too, bore the quiet sadness of children who had lost their mother too young, though they tried to maintain excitement about seeing their Aunt Lila for the first time since the funeral. As they boarded the aircraft, Ahmed helped each child find their assigned seats in row 23, near the back of the plane. Amira, the eldest, was old enough to understand the family sadness but tried to be brave for her younger siblings. Omar clutched a small toy airplane that had belonged to his mother, while little Yasmin held tightly to a worn stuffed rabbit that still carried the faint scent of Fatima's perfume. "Baba," Amira whispered in Arabic as they settled into their seats, "will Aunt Lila tell us more stories about Mama?" Ahmed's eyes softened as he helped his daughter with her seatbelt. "Yes, Habibti, she has many stories about your mother that you haven't heard yet." The flight crew completed their standard safety demonstrations, and soon the aircraft was taxiing toward the runway. Ahmed had flown this route many times for medical conferences, usually in business class when the hospital was covering his expenses. Today he was grateful simply to afford the economy tickets that would allow his children to maintain their connection with their mother's family. Captain Robert Nielsen was completing his final pre-flight checks when his attention was drawn to a conversation taking place in the cabin behind him. Flight attendant Sandra Voss had approached him with concerns about passengers in the economy section. "Captain," Sandra began, her voice carrying a tone of professional concern, "we have a situation with some passengers in rows 22 and 23. There's been a complaint about noise and inappropriate behavior from some children." Nielsen looked up from his checklist. At 55, he had been flying commercial aircraft for over 20 years and prided himself on maintaining order and discipline aboard his flights. He was known among his colleagues for running a tight ship and having little patience for passengers who disrupted the comfort of others. "What kind of inappropriate behavior?" Nielsen asked,
his tone already suggesting his assumption that this was another case of inadequate parental supervision. The passengers in row 22 complained that the children behind them are being loud and disruptive. Apparently, the father isn't controlling them properly, and they're speaking in a foreign language, which is making other passengers uncomfortable. Sandra's report was a significant mischaracterization of what was actually occurring. The children had been speaking quietly in Arabic with their father, occasionally asking innocent questions about the flight, or expressing excitement about seeing their aunt. Any noise they had made was well within normal limits for young children on an aircraft. The passengers in row 22 were Hans and Greta Müller, a middle-aged German couple who had immediately felt uncomfortable when they realized they were seated directly in front of a Middle Eastern family. Their complaint was rooted not in any actual disturbance, but in their own prejudices and assumptions about Muslim families. "I see," Captain Nielsen said, his expression hardening. He had dealt with similar situations before, and his experience had led him to develop certain assumptions about passengers who fit particular profiles. "I'll handle this before we take off. We can't have disruptions during a flight." Without bothering to observe the family's actual behavior himself, Nielsen left the cockpit and walked toward the back of the aircraft. His approach was already confrontational, based entirely on Sandra's biased report and his own preconceptions about the situation. Ahmed was helping Yasmin color in a small activity book when he became aware of a uniformed figure standing in the aisle beside their row. He looked up to see Captain Nielsen, whose stern expression and rigid posture immediately conveyed disapproval. "Sir, I understand there have been complaints about noise and disruptive behavior from your children. I need you to control them immediately, or we're going to have a problem." Ahmed was genuinely confused by the accusation. His children had been remarkably well behaved, speaking quietly among themselves and engaging in peaceful activities. Yasmin had been coloring, Omar was reading a picture book, and Amira was helping her younger siblings while occasionally asking whispered questions about their flight. "I'm sorry, Captain," Ahmed replied politely in accented but fluent English, "but I'm not sure what behavior you're referring to. My children have been very quiet and well behaved." Nielsen's expression grew more severe. He had interpreted Ahmed's polite questioning as defiance, and the man's accent reinforced his prejudiced assumptions about the family's background and intentions. "Sir, I don't appreciate being challenged by passengers who can't control their children. You've been speaking in a foreign language, which makes other passengers uncomfortable, and your children have been disruptive since boarding." The accusation about speaking Arabic was particularly painful for Ahmed. His children were trilingual, fluent in Arabic, Dutch, and English, and he encouraged them to maintain their connection to their mother's native language as part of honoring her memory. The suggestion that their private family conversation was somehow inappropriate or threatening was both insulting and deeply hurtful. "Captain," Ahmed said, maintaining his composed tone despite his growing frustration, "my children are being respectful and appropriate. I believe there may be a misunderstanding about what constitutes disruptive behavior." Nielsen interpreted Ahmed's calm response as continued defiance. The fact that this passenger was articulate and confident in his English somehow made the captain even more irritated, as it didn't fit his preconceived notions about the family's background. "Sir, I am the captain of this aircraft, and my word is final. You will comply with my instructions, or you will be removed from this flight. I suggest you think carefully about your next response." The ultimatum hung in the air like a challenge, drawing the attention of passengers throughout the surrounding area. Ahmed found himself in an impossible position: comply with discriminatory demands that would humiliate his family and teach his children that prejudice should be accepted without resistance, or stand his ground and risk being removed from the flight, which would disappoint his children and prevent them from visiting their aunt.
Ahmed Hassan found himself facing an impossible choice as Captain Nielsen's ultimatum hung in the air. The surrounding passengers watched with a mixture of curiosity, discomfort, and in some cases, apparent approval of the captain's harsh approach. His 3 children looked up at him with confused eyes, sensing the tension but not fully understanding why this uniformed stranger was speaking to their father with such obvious hostility. "Captain Nielsen," Ahmed said, choosing his words carefully while maintaining his composure, "I understand your concerns about maintaining order on your aircraft. However, I believe you may have received inaccurate information about my family's behavior. We have been respectful and quiet throughout the boarding process." Nielsen's expression hardened further at what he perceived as continued defiance. In his 20 years of flying, he had developed a particular distaste for passengers who questioned his authority, especially those he viewed as outsiders or potential troublemakers. Ahmed's calm, articulate response only reinforced his prejudiced assumption that this was an educated troublemaker rather than simply a disruptive passenger. "Sir, I don't have time for debates with passengers who refuse to accept responsibility for their behavior. My crew has reported multiple complaints about your family's conduct, and I will not tolerate any further disruption on my aircraft." This was a significant exaggeration of the actual situation. Sandra Voss had relayed a single complaint from the German couple in row 22, and she had embellished their concerns to align with her own biases about Middle Eastern families. There had been no multiple complaints, no actual disruption, and no legitimate safety concerns. Ahmed glanced at his children, who were becoming increasingly distressed by the confrontation. Little Yasmin had tears forming in her eyes, while Omar clutched his toy airplane tighter against his chest. Amira, the eldest, was old enough to recognize the injustice of the situation, and her face showed the same kind of angry confusion she had experienced during incidents of discrimination at school. "Please, Captain," Ahmed said, his voice taking on a more urgent tone as he saw the effect the confrontation was having on his children. "Whatever complaints you received were not based on any actual misbehavior. My children are upset now because of this conversation, but they were perfectly well behaved before you approached us." Sandra Voss, the flight attendant who had initiated this confrontation, stood nearby watching the exchange with satisfaction. In her mind, she was witnessing necessary discipline being applied to passengers who didn't understand proper aircraft etiquette. She failed to recognize that her own biased report had created this entirely unnecessary situation. But not everyone in the surrounding area shared Sandra's approval of the captain's approach. Dr. Maria Gonzalez, a pediatric psychologist traveling in seat 21C, had been observing the Hassan family since boarding. As a professional who worked with children daily, she had noticed how well-behaved and respectful Ahmed's children were throughout the boarding process. She had actually been impressed by their quiet conduct and their father's gentle, patient interaction with them. Dr. Gonzalez found herself growing increasingly uncomfortable as she watched Captain Nielsen's hostile approach to a family that had done absolutely nothing wrong. Her professional training had taught her to recognize the signs of discrimination and bias, and this situation displayed all the classic elements of prejudicial treatment based on ethnicity and religion. "Excuse me, Captain," Dr. Gonzalez said, standing up from her seat and addressing Nielsen directly. "I've been sitting near this family since we boarded, and I can tell you that they have been exceptionally well behaved. The children have been quiet and respectful, and the father has been nothing but courteous and appropriate." Nielsen turned his attention to this new voice, clearly irritated by what he saw as interference from another passenger. "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but crew members are better qualified to assess passenger behavior and safety issues."
"I'm Dr. Maria Gonzalez," she replied firmly, "and I work with children professionally. These children have demonstrated exemplary behavior, and I believe this confrontation is unnecessary and inappropriate." Her intervention created a ripple of attention throughout the nearby seats. Other passengers began to pay closer attention to the situation, and several started murmuring among themselves about what they were witnessing. The dynamics of the confrontation were beginning to shift as independent witnesses spoke up in support of the Hassan family. Ahmed felt a surge of gratitude toward Dr. Gonzalez, but he also recognized that the situation was becoming more complicated and potentially more volatile. He needed to find a way to de-escalate the confrontation while protecting his children from further distress and humiliation. "Captain Nielsen," Ahmed said, reaching into his jacket pocket, "perhaps I should provide you with some additional information about who we are and why we're traveling today."
He withdrew his medical identification badge, which clearly displayed his photograph, name, and title. Dr. Ahmed Hassan, Chief of Pediatric Surgery, Amsterdam University Medical Center. The badge also included the hospital's official seal and his medical license number. Nielsen glanced at the identification with obvious skepticism. In his mind, anyone could obtain fake credentials, and the fact that this passenger was producing official-looking documentation seemed suspicious rather than reassuring. "Sir, identification can be forged. What matters is your behavior on my aircraft, not whatever credentials you might carry." Ahmed felt a familiar frustration rise in his chest. Throughout his career, he had encountered people who simply refused to accept his professional credentials when they conflicted with their prejudiced assumptions. It was particularly painful in this moment because his children were witnessing their father being dismissed and disrespected despite his efforts to resolve the situation peacefully. "Captain," Dr. Gonzalez interjected again, "I can verify Dr. Hassan's credentials. Amsterdam University Medical Center is one of Europe's most prestigious hospitals, and their chief of pediatric surgery would indeed carry official identification." But Nielsen was becoming increasingly entrenched in his position. The fact that multiple passengers were now questioning his judgment felt like a direct challenge to his authority, and his response was to double down on his original decision rather than reconsider the situation. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to return to your seat and allow me to handle this situation. And sir," he turned back to Ahmed, "credentials or no credentials, you and your family have been disruptive, and I will not tolerate any further problems." At this point, Amira could no longer contain her frustration and confusion. In accented but clear English, she looked up at Captain Nielsen and said, "Why are you being mean to my Baba? He's a good doctor who helps children get better." The innocent question from an 8-year-old child hung in the air, highlighting the absurdity of the entire confrontation. Here was a little girl, still grieving the loss of her mother, trying to defend her father against treatment that she instinctively recognized as unfair. Nielsen looked down at Amira with obvious irritation. "Young lady, children should not interrupt adult conversations. This is exactly the kind of inappropriate behavior I was told about." Ahmed's protective instincts flared as he saw the captain directing his hostility toward his grieving daughter. "Captain Nielsen, please do not speak to my child that way. She was simply responding to a situation that is confusing and frightening for her." The confrontation was now drawing attention from passengers throughout the aircraft. Many were pulling out their phones, recognizing that they were witnessing something significant and potentially newsworthy. The combination of a uniformed captain aggressively confronting a Middle Eastern family, including young children, while independent witnesses defended the family's behavior, created a scene that was both dramatic and deeply troubling.
Sandra Voss finally began to recognize that the situation she had initiated was spiraling out of control. She approached Captain Nielsen with a concerned expression, whispering urgently in his ear about the growing attention from other passengers and the potential for negative publicity. But Nielsen was too committed to his course of action to back down gracefully. In his mind, allowing this passenger to win the confrontation would undermine his authority and encourage future challenges from other passengers. He failed to recognize that his authority was actually being undermined by his own unreasonable and discriminatory behavior. "Sir," Nielsen said, his voice now loud enough to be heard throughout most of the economy section, "I'm giving you one final opportunity to comply with my instructions. Control your children, stop speaking foreign languages, and follow crew directions without argument. If you cannot agree to these conditions, you and your family will be removed from this aircraft immediately." Ahmed looked around at the faces surrounding him. He saw Dr. Gonzalez's expression of outrage and support. He saw other passengers shaking their heads in disapproval of the captain's behavior. He saw his 3 children looking up at him with trust and confusion, waiting for their father to somehow make this frightening situation better. Most importantly, he thought about his late wife Fatima and what she would have wanted him to do in this moment. She had always taught their children to stand up for what is right, to treat others with dignity and respect, and to never accept discrimination or injustice without peaceful resistance.
"Captain Nielsen," Ahmed said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man accustomed to making life-and-death decisions under pressure, "I will not agree to conditions that are discriminatory and unreasonable. My family has done nothing wrong, and we will not be treated as second-class passengers because of our ethnicity or religion." The declaration created a moment of absolute silence in the cabin. Ahmed had drawn a clear line in the sand, refusing to accept discriminatory treatment despite the potential consequences. His children looked up at him with a mixture of fear and pride, recognizing that their father was standing up for their family's dignity. Nielsen's face flushed red with anger at what he saw as open defiance of his authority. "Fine, that's your choice. Security will escort you and your family off this aircraft immediately." As Nielsen stormed toward the front of the plane to call for security, Dr. Gonzalez stood up again and addressed the surrounding passengers in a voice loud enough to be heard throughout the section. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we just witnessed was a clear case of discrimination against a family who has done absolutely nothing wrong. Dr. Hassan and his children have been exemplary passengers, and they are being removed from this flight solely because of prejudice and bias." Her words sparked immediate conversation throughout the cabin. Passengers began openly discussing what they had witnessed, with many expressing outrage at the captain's treatment of the Hassan family. Several people approached Ahmed to offer their support and to ask if there was anything they could do to help. A businessman named Robert Chen, who had been sitting across the aisle, stood up and walked over to Ahmed. "Dr. Hassan, I'm Robert Chen from Chen Industries. I witnessed this entire confrontation, and I want you to know that what just happened was completely unacceptable. I'm going to document everything I saw and make sure the airline's management hears about this situation." Similar expressions of support came from other passengers throughout the section. What Captain Nielsen had intended as a display of authority was instead becoming a public relations disaster for European Express Airlines, with multiple witnesses ready to testify about discriminatory treatment of passengers. As they waited for security to arrive, Ahmed gathered his children close to him and spoke to them quietly in Arabic, explaining that sometimes good people have to stand up to unfair treatment, even when it's difficult. He assured them that they had done nothing wrong and that he was proud of how well they had behaved. Amira looked up at her father with serious 8-year-old eyes and said, "Baba, Mama would be proud of you for standing up to the mean man." Ahmed felt tears threaten his eyes as he hugged his daughter. "Yes, Habibti, Mama would want us to always do what is right,
even when it's hard. When airport security arrived, they found a completely calm family surrounded by supportive passengers and multiple witnesses ready to testify about discriminatory treatment. The security officers, experienced in handling passenger disputes, immediately recognized that this was not a typical case of disruptive passengers, but rather a situation involving potential discrimination complaints. Officer Jan de Vries, the lead security officer, approached Ahmed with professional courtesy. "Sir, I understand there's been some kind of dispute with the flight crew. Can you tell me what happened from your perspective?" Ahmed calmly and factually recounted the entire sequence of events, from the initial complaint about his children speaking Arabic to Captain Nielsen's ultimatum and threats. Dr. Gonzalez and several other passengers immediately volunteered to serve as witnesses, corroborating Ahmed's account and contradicting the crew's characterization of the family as disruptive. Officer de Vries had dealt with hundreds of passenger incidents, and his experience told him that this situation was highly unusual. The accused family was calm and articulate, supported by multiple independent witnesses, while the crew seemed defensive and unable to provide specific examples of actual misconduct. "Dr. Hassan," Officer de Vries said after reviewing the situation, "based on what I am hearing from you and the witnesses, it appears there may have been a misunderstanding or overreaction by the flight crew. However, since the captain has requested your removal, we do need to process this incident formally." Ahmed nodded with understanding. "Officer de Vries, I appreciate your professional approach to this situation. I want you to know that I will be filing formal complaints with the airline and with appropriate civil rights organizations about the discriminatory treatment my family received." As the Hassan family was escorted off the aircraft, many passengers stood up to show their support and to exchange contact information so they could serve as witnesses if needed. Dr. Gonzalez handed Ahmed her business card and assured him that she would provide a detailed written statement about everything she had observed. Captain Nielsen, watching from the cockpit, felt a growing sense of unease as he observed the supportive response from other passengers. What had seemed like a straightforward case of passenger discipline was clearly becoming something much more complicated and potentially damaging to his career and the airline's reputation. As Ahmed and his children walked through the airport terminal, he pulled out his phone and made two important calls. The first was to his sister-in-law, Layla, in Barcelona, explaining the situation and assuring her that they would find another way to visit soon. The second call was to his colleague, Dr. Elizabeth Vanderberg, who served on the board of directors for European Express Airlines' parent company, Global Transport Holdings. Dr. Vanderberg listened with growing concern as Ahmed described the discriminatory treatment his family had received. As one of Europe's most respected medical administrators and a longtime advocate for equal rights, she understood immediately that this incident represented both a serious injustice and a significant liability for the airline. "Ahmed, what happened to your family is absolutely unacceptable, and I want you to know that this will be addressed at the highest levels of the organization. But more than that, I think this incident could be an opportunity to create meaningful change in how airlines handle cultural sensitivity and passenger rights." As Ahmed arranged alternative transportation for his family to Barcelona, he reflected on the day's events and what they meant for his children's understanding of justice, discrimination, and the importance of standing up for what is right. Little did he know that his calm but firm response to discriminatory treatment would soon lead to industry-wide changes in airline policies and training programs.
The phone call between Dr. Ahmed Hassan and Dr. Elizabeth Vanderberg would prove to be one of the most consequential conversations in European aviation history. As Ahmed sat in the Amsterdam airport terminal with his three confused and disappointed children, explaining to Dr. Vanderberg the discriminatory treatment they had just experienced, he had no idea that his calm, factual account was being heard by one of the most influential people in the airline industry. Dr. Elizabeth Vanderberg was not just any board member of Global Transport Holdings. She was the former Director General of the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control, a respected medical researcher and one of the most powerful women in European business. Her appointment to the Global Transport Holdings Board had been specifically intended to bring medical expertise and social responsibility to the airline industry, particularly in the wake of various discrimination scandals that had plagued European airlines in recent years. "Ahmed," Dr. Vanderberg said, her voice carrying both personal concern and professional indignation, "what you and your children experience today is absolutely unconscionable. But I want you to understand something important. This incident is going to result in significant changes, not just for European Express Airlines, but for our entire industry." As Ahmed arranged for his family to take a later flight on a different airline, Dr. Vanderberg was already making calls to the highest levels of Global Transport Holdings. Her first call was to CEO Jonathan Blackwood, interrupting his executive meeting in London with news that would transform his afternoon priorities. "Jonathan," she began without preamble, "we have a serious crisis developing with European Express Flight 892 from Amsterdam to Barcelona. One of our captains has just removed a family from the aircraft based on what appears to be clear ethnic and religious discrimination. The family in question is headed by Dr. Ahmed Hassan, Chief of Pediatric Surgery at Amsterdam University Medical Center, and there were multiple passenger witnesses who have contradicted the crew's account of events." Blackwood felt his stomach drop. Global Transport Holdings had spent millions of euros in recent years trying to improve their reputation for customer service and cultural sensitivity after several high-profile discrimination incidents. The last thing they needed was another public relations disaster involving alleged prejudicial treatment of passengers. "How serious is this situation, Elizabeth?" Blackwood asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Jonathan, this could be catastrophic if we don't handle it properly. Dr. Hassan is not just any passenger. He's a prominent medical professional with connections throughout European healthcare systems. More importantly, he's the type of person whose experience will be believed and whose story will resonate with media outlets and civil rights organizations." Within hours, Dr. Vanderberg's prediction began to prove accurate. Dr. Maria Gonzalez, the pediatric psychologist who had witnessed the discrimination, had already posted a detailed account of the incident on her professional social media accounts. Her post, which included photos and video footage of the confrontation, quickly gained traction among her network of medical professionals and child advocacy specialists. "Today, I witnessed one of the most appalling displays of discrimination I've ever seen. A highly respected pediatric surgeon and his 3 young children were removed from a European Express flight not for any misconduct, but simply because they were speaking Arabic and because the captain held prejudiced assumptions about Middle Eastern families. This family had just lost their mother and were traveling to visit relatives, yet they were subjected to humiliation and discriminatory treatment that no family should ever experience." The post was shared hundreds of times within the first few hours, with comments from medical professionals, parents, and civil rights advocates expressing outrage at the treatment the Hassan family had received. Several prominent physicians who knew Ahmed professionally began sharing their own testimonials about his character and contributions to pediatric medicine. Meanwhile, Robert Chen, the owner of a successful import-export company with significant business relations throughout Europe, was making good on his promise to document everything he had observed. He had recorded portions of the confrontation on his smartphone and had collected contact information from other passengers who were willing to serve as witnesses. His detailed written account of the incident, supported by video evidence and witness statements, was sent directly to European Express Airlines customer service, the Dutch aviation authorities,
and several prominent journalists who specialized in covering discrimination and civil rights issues.
The response from European Express Airlines Customer Service Department was initially dismissive and bureaucratic. The standard reply thanked Chen for his concern and assured him that all passenger incidents were handled according to established protocols. This generic response only served to further inflame the situation, as it suggested that the airline was not taking the discrimination allegations seriously. But behind the scenes, the airline's executive leadership was scrambling to understand and contain the growing crisis. Captain Robert Nielsen, who had initiated the discriminatory treatment of the Hassan family, found himself called into an emergency meeting with Chief of Flight Operations Paul Vandermeer and Director of Customer Relations Sarah de Jong. "Robert," Vandermeer began, his tone grave and professional, "I need you to walk me through exactly what happened on Flight 892 today. We're getting reports from multiple sources that suggest there may have been some irregularities in how you handled the passenger situation." Nielsen, still convinced that his actions had been justified, recounted his version of events with confidence. In his telling, the Hassan family had been disruptive and non-compliant, speaking in foreign languages that made other passengers uncomfortable and refusing to follow reasonable crew instructions about maintaining order during the flight. "So you're telling me," Sarah de Jong interjected, "that you removed a family from the aircraft because they were speaking Arabic with each other?" "I removed them because they were being disruptive and non-cooperative," Nielsen replied defensively. "The language issue was just one aspect of their inappropriate behavior." Vandermeer exchanged a concerned glance with de Jong. They both understood that Nielsen's account, even in his own telling, described actions that could constitute clear discrimination based on ethnicity and religion. The fact that he seemed unaware of the legal and ethical problems with his behavior only made the situation more serious. "Robert," Vandermeer said carefully, "are you aware that Dr. Hassan is the chief of pediatric surgery at one of Europe's most prestigious hospitals? Are you aware that multiple passengers have provided witness statements contradicting your account of his family's behavior? Are you aware that this incident is already gaining significant media attention and could result in serious legal consequences for both you and the airline?" Nielsen's confidence began to waver as the implications of the situation became clearer. He had acted on assumptions and prejudices, supported by an equally biased flight attendant, without bothering to verify the actual facts or consider the consequences of his decisions. While European Express Airlines management grappled with the developing crisis, Ahmed and his children had arrived in Barcelona on an alternate flight. Despite the day's traumatic events, Ahmed was determined not to let discrimination ruin his children's opportunity to visit their aunt and learn more about their mother's heritage. Laila Mansouri, Fatima's sister, welcomed them with the warmth and love that Ahmed's children desperately needed after their difficult experience. As the children played with their cousins and slowly began to process the day's events, Ahmed found himself in deep conversation with Laila about how to help his children understand and cope with the discrimination they had witnessed. "Ahmed," Laila said as they watched the children playing together in her Barcelona apartment, "Fatima would be so proud of how you handled that situation today. You stood up for your family's dignity while teaching the children about justice and principle." "I just hope I made the right choice," Ahmed replied. "Part of me wonders if I should have simply accepted their demands to avoid traumatizing the children further." "No," Laila said firmly. "What you taught them today is that good people don't accept injustice quietly. That's a lesson Fatima would have wanted them to learn." Their conversation was interrupted by Ahmed's phone ringing. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar London number, but Ahmed answered anyway, curious about who might be calling him while he was in Barcelona. "Dr. Hassan, this is Jonathan Blackwood, Chief Executive Officer of Global Transport Holdings, the parent company of European Express Airlines. I am calling to personally apologize for the unconscionable treatment you and your family received today, and to discuss immediate steps we are taking to address this situation." Ahmed was surprised by the call, but not entirely shocked. He had expected some kind of response from the airline's management, though he hadn't anticipated direct contact from the CEO level. "Mr. Blackwood," Ahmed replied, "I appreciate you taking the time to call personally. What happened today was indeed unacceptable, but I'm more interested in ensuring that other families don't experience similar discrimination than I am in personal apologies." "That's exactly what I was hoping you would say. Dr. Hassan, we want to offer you a position as Special Advisor on Cultural Sensitivity and Passenger Rights. We need someone with your experience and credibility to help us completely overhaul our policies and training programs." The offer was both surprising and intriguing. Ahmed had never considered working in the aviation industry, but the opportunity to create systemic change that could protect other families from discrimination was compelling.
Over the following weeks, as Ahmed considered Blackwood's offer and spent quality time with his children in Barcelona, the story of their discriminatory treatment continued to gain national and international attention. European media outlets picked up the story, with several major newspapers and television programs featuring detailed accounts of the incident and broader discussions about discrimination in air travel. The coverage was particularly impactful because it featured not just Ahmed's perspective, but also statements from Dr. Maria Gonzalez and other passenger witnesses who had observed the family's exemplary behavior and the crew's inappropriate response. The contrast between the family's actual conduct and the discriminatory treatment they received made for a compelling narrative that resonated with readers and viewers across Europe. Captain Robert Nielsen found himself at the center of a media storm that would effectively end his career in commercial aviation. European Express Airlines, facing mounting pressure from media coverage, passenger complaints, and potential legal action, announced that Nielsen had been terminated for violating company policies regarding respectful treatment of passengers. Sandra Vos, the flight attendant whose biased report had initiated the confrontation, was suspended pending completion of mandatory cultural sensitivity training. Unlike Nielsen, she was offered an opportunity to continue her career with the airline if she could demonstrate genuine understanding of the issues involved and commitment to treating all passengers with equal respect. 3 months after the incident, Ahmed accepted the position of Special Advisor on Cultural Sensitivity and Passenger Rights with Global Transport Holdings. His first major project was developing a comprehensive training program for flight crews, gate agents, and customer service representatives that would help them recognize and prevent discriminatory treatment of passengers. The program Ahmed developed was revolutionary in its scope and specificity. Rather than generic sensitivity training that employees often viewed as bureaucratic box-checking, Ahmed created scenario-based education that helped staff understand the real-world impact of bias and discrimination on passengers and families. The goal, Ahmed explained during the program's launch presentation, is not just to avoid legal liability or negative publicity. The goal is to create an airline culture where every passenger feels welcomed and respected, regardless of their background, language, religion, or any other personal characteristic. The training program included modules on unconscious bias, cultural competency, conflict de-escalation, and the legal requirements for equal treatment of passengers. Most importantly, it emphasized the human impact of discrimination, featuring real stories from passengers who had experienced prejudicial treatment and families who had been affected by biased airline policies. Ahmed's children, now several months past the traumatic incident, had become advocates in their own right for respectful treatment and cultural understanding. Amira, in particular, had developed a remarkable ability to articulate the experience of discrimination from a child's perspective, helping adults understand how prejudicial treatment affects young people and families. At a conference on aviation industry practices, 8-year-old Amira spoke to an audience of airline executives, pilots, and flight attendants about her family's experience and what it had taught her about standing up for what's right. My Baba taught me that when people treat you badly because of how you look or what language you speak, you should never accept it. But you should also never be mean back to them. You should try to help them learn to be better people. The audience, many of whom were parents themselves, was visibly moved by Amira's mature perspective on discrimination and forgiveness. Her words became a central part of Ahmed's training program, reminding airline staff that their actions affect not just individual passengers, but entire families, including vulnerable children. 1 year after the original incident, European Express Airlines published their first annual Diversity and Inclusion Report, documenting dramatic improvements in passenger satisfaction scores among minority travelers and significant reductions in discrimination complaints. The report featured case studies of successful conflict resolution, testimonials from passengers who had received exceptional service, and detailed data showing the positive impact of Ahmed's training programs. Perhaps most remarkably, the report included a personal statement from Sandra Vos, the flight attendant whose biased report had initiated the discriminatory treatment of the Hassan family. After completing extensive cultural sensitivity training and working closely with Ahmed on program development, Sandra had become one of the airline's most effective advocates for respectful passenger treatment. I made a terrible mistake based on my own unconscious biases and prejudiced assumptions. Dr. Hassan and his family showed me grace and forgiveness that I didn't deserve, and they gave me the opportunity to learn and grow from my errors. Now, I work every day to ensure that no other family experiences what the Hassan family went through because of my prejudice. The transformation was genuine and profound. Sandra had volunteered hundreds of hours to cultural competency organizations, learned basic Arabic phrases to better serve Middle Eastern passengers, and became a mentor for new flight attendants learning about respectful customer service. 2 years after the incident, Ahmed received an invitation that would have seemed impossible on that difficult day in Amsterdam. European Express Airlines wanted to name him their Humanitarian of the Year and dedicate their new training center to promoting cultural understanding and passenger rights. The ceremony took place at the airline's headquarters in Amsterdam, with Ahmed's children proudly watching as his father was honored for his work in transforming airline industry practices. Dr. Elizabeth Vanderberg, who had become a close friend and collaborator, introduced Ahmed by describing his unique contribution to aviation safety and customer service. Dr. Hassan could have responded to discrimination with anger, lawsuits, and demands for punishment. Instead, he chose to respond with wisdom, offering solutions rather than simply identifying problems. His work has made air travel safer and more respectful for millions of passengers across Europe and beyond. As Ahmed accepted the award, he reflected on the journey that had brought his family from that traumatic incident in Amsterdam to this moment of recognition and positive change. Standing beside him were Amira, Omar, and Yasmin, now confident young people who understood both the reality of discrimination and the power of responding to injustice with dignity and determination. 2 years ago, my children and I experienced treatment that no family should ever endure. But today, because of the commitment of this organization to real change and meaningful reform, thousands of families will travel with greater dignity and respect. That transformation from a moment of injustice to systematic positive change is what I believe my late wife Fatima would have wanted to see result from our experience. The impact of Ahmed's work extended far beyond European Express Airlines. Other major airlines began adopting similar training programs and cultural competency initiatives. Aviation industry associations invited Ahmed to speak at conferences and contribute to policy development discussions. Most importantly, passenger advocacy organizations reported significant decreases in discrimination complaints and improvements in the travel experiences of minority families.
But perhaps the most meaningful outcome was the relationship that had developed between the Hassan family and the people who had initially discriminated against them. Captain Nielsen, despite losing his job, had eventually reached out to Ahmed to apologize personally and ask for guidance in addressing his own biases. Sandra Vos had become not just a colleague, but a friend, someone who regularly visited the Hassan family and had learned to speak Arabic with the children. On the third anniversary of the incident, Ahmed, his children, and Dr. Gonzalez took a commemorative flight from Amsterdam to Barcelona on European Express Airlines. The crew, aware of the significance of the journey, provided exceptional service that reflected the cultural competency training and respectful passenger treatment policies that had resulted from that original discrimination. As the aircraft lifted off from Amsterdam's Schiphol Airport, Ahmed's daughter, Amira, looked out the window and said softly, "Baba, I think Mama would be happy that something good came from something bad." Ahmed squeezed his daughter's hand and nodded. "Yes, Habibti. Your mother always believed that difficult experiences could become opportunities to make the world a little better for other people. That's exactly what happened here." The flight to Barcelona was peaceful and pleasant, a stark contrast to their traumatic experience 3 years earlier. But more importantly, it represented something larger. Proof that individual acts of dignity and principle, even in the face of discrimination and injustice, could create lasting positive change that benefits countless others. As Ahmed watched his children laughing and playing during the flight, he realized that they had learned one of life's most important lessons, that how we respond to adversity defines not just our own character, but the kind of world we create for future generations. Their discrimination they had faced had been painful and wrong, but their response had helped ensure that other families would travel with greater respect and dignity. Their story had become more than just an account of overcoming prejudice. It had become a blueprint for transforming injustice into positive social change through patience, wisdom, and an unwavering commitment to doing what's right.